It really is world class. It's admired around the world. It gives a lot of very granular data about where cases are breaking out, patterns across the UK. We will keep that going. We will keep observing what is happening because we want to have the keenest pair of eyes in the crow's nest to watch for the iceberg in the form of a new variant. And that's the thing. That's the thing we've really got to test for, and the big surveillance tests are the way to do that. And if we see something like that, then that's the moment to get to Patrick's point. That's the moment when we ramp up, and we immediately go back to all the things that we have learnt to do. So we'll have a stockpile of LFDs, of lateral flow tests. We can make at least some of them already in this country. We have labs that will keep going, like the Rosalind Franklin lab, mobile testing units, and so on. So what we want is to have a formula of surveillance followed by surge if necessary. But we can only take the strategy, only adopt the strategy we're adopting today, because of the success of the vaccines and the way Omicron is currently responding. And sorry, on Ukraine, I just to say, I gathered just as I came into this press conference that Vladimir Putin has effectively announced that Russia is recognizing the breakaway republics of Donetsk and Lugansk. This is plainly in breach of international law. It's a violation, a flagrant violation of the sovereignty and integrity of Ukraine. It is a repudiation of the Minsk process and the Minsk agreements, and I think it's a very ill omen and a very dark sign. And it certainly does not seem to me that it's certainly an indication, yet another indication, that things are moving in the wrong direction in Ukraine. The UK will continue to do everything we can to stand by the people of Ukraine with a very robust package of sanctions, as you know, fortifying the eastern flank of NATO in all the ways that we have, but also being one of the few countries to have given the Ukrainians the defensive, I stress defensive, weaponry that we think is appropriate to their needs. And we will continue to think about what more we can do to support Ukraine in what is clearly a very, very dark and difficult time. I know there was a question for you, Chris.
In terms of on the testing, there are essentially three reasons for testing. There's surveillance, and I think the intention, as the Prime Minister has said, is to continue surveillance. There will be some modification to that, but the aim is to have a good surveillance system because you need that for policy decisions. The second reason is clinical, to guide treatment. Expectations continue that in the NHS. There are questions about exactly how we do this in terms of getting antivirals to the people who most need them, and that's a key decision that needs to be taken over the next period. And then the third reason, and this is the one that is being scaled back, but not yet, but will be scaled back, is using them for control. But as the Prime Minister said, as and when the surveillance shows you need it, what everybody has stressed is there's the need to be able to stand things up again if necessary, were there to be something that's severe enough to need it. So it's that third area where the biggest changes will really occur.
I mean, I don't think anywhere across the world where restrictions are being relaxed, you can have any other view other than that will increase transmission. So that is inevitable as you go back to normal life, that transmission risk increases. At the beginning, we just didn't have tests. We've now got tests, and fortunately we've got lateral flow tests which can be stored and released very quickly. And so it's going to really have to be this rapid detection and response at scale in order to get testing into the right place, depending on what the circumstances are. And as Chris has indicated, at the moment with Omicron, I mean, it's spread very widely. It hasn't caused huge numbers. It has caused some, and it has in other countries caused quite a lot. But in this country, it hasn't got huge numbers of very ill people or deaths. If that changes, then obviously testing becomes more important. In the meantime, the testing must be there for people who need it. And that definition of people who are in that at-risk group is critical for appropriate use of testing.
Thanks. Robert Peston, ITV.
A couple of questions. On Ukraine, recognition of Lugansk and Donetsk is a clear violation of international law, as you say. It's accelerating the breakup of Ukraine. Surely this is the moment to introduce additional severe sanctions. The time for waiting must be past. And on what you've announced today, a couple of questions. One is, after April the 1st, if you get COVID, will you isolate? Secondly, you announced today the end of the self-isolation support package, and within a few weeks you won't be able to get statutory sick pay on day one. You are making it harder for poorer people to do what you think is the right thing, which is to isolate if they get COVID.
So, fine, thanks, Robert, very much. So, on the statutory sick pay issue, first of all, and we will continue with the day one payments for the next few weeks, but I think after that, what we need to recognise is that we're effectively dealing with particularly in vaccinated people, with a disease that is like norovirus or flu or any other infectious respiratory disease, and people should think about how they interact with others, and they should be respectful of other people's health and behave responsibly, and that goes for any. That point I'm trying to make is that goes for any infectious disease which you might be bringing into contact with people who are vulnerable. I think in this country, I've often heard it said over the last couple of years that we have a habit of going back to work or going into work when we're not well, and people contrast that with Germany, for instance, where I'm told they're much more disciplined about not going to work if you're sick, and I'm just suggesting that might be something we could learn. And as for me, I will exercise restraint and responsibility and try to avoid infecting other people. And on your point about sanctions, look, we have to see what exactly has happened in Donetsk and Lugansk in the Donbass area. What I have said before about the package of sanctions is that they will be triggered with the first toe cap of a Russian incursion or Russian invasion. But plainly, what has happened is extremely bad news, and we will be urgently talking to our friends and allies around the world, all of whom are jointly signed up with us in this package of sanctions, because it is. I think the drift of your question is right. It is becoming clear that we're going to need to start applying as much pressure as we possibly can, because it is hard to see how this situation improves. Let's go to Beth Rigby of Sky.
Thank you. Prime Minister, just to follow up on Ukraine, 10 days ago at NATO, I asked you if you were coming to the conclusion that President Putin actually wants this war. At the time you said, I honestly don't think a decision has been made. What do you think tonight? How has that changed? And on the matter of COVID, Prime Minister, you've spoken about hope tonight and the country getting its confidence back. But to Sir Patrick and Sir Chris, it seems to me that you're making it clear that this pandemic is far from over. What are you feeling? Are you more anxious than confident as these restrictions are dropped? And to the Prime Minister, we've been doing these press conferences now on COVID for 2 years. COVID has dominated your premiership. It put you in hospital. It could bring about your downfall depending on the outcome of that Met investigation. And today it seems that you're trying to turn the page. But would you be satisfied if your legacy ends up being COVID and your conduct during it? Thank you.
Yeah. So first of all, on your question about COVID, and I think Chris and Patrick may want to talk about anxiety. Look, I think that the country as a whole, when you look at the response to that the government was able to mount to COVID, and you look at what the country has done, I think the two things have gone together, and I think it's been quite remarkable. And if you look at the numbers at the back of the Living with COVID document about vaccination rates, rollouts, what we've been able to do, we were incredibly fast, and that was a joint work of the British public and the government. The public were absolutely heroic in what they did, and I will be very, very proud of what has been achieved, to be frank with you. But on the anxiety point, I don't want you to think that there's some, division between the gung-ho politicians and the cautious, anxious scientists. Much though it may suit everybody to say so, we have a very clear view of this. This has not gone away. We're able to make these changes now because of the vaccines and the high level of immunity and all the other considerations about Omicron that you've seen. But we have to face the fact that there could be, likely will be, another variant that will cause us trouble. But I believe that thanks to a lot of the stuff that we've done, particularly investment in vaccines and vaccine technology and therapeutics, we'll be in a far better position to tackle that new variant when it comes. And on your question about Putin, and I don't know what's in his mind. I can't read it. I think there's still a chance that he could row back from this, and we've got to pray that that's the case.
In terms of anxious or confident, I come from a profession which tries to train you not to be either of those things and to go between the middle and just have a plan and be steady about it, say these are the facts, this is the plan, this is what we're going to do, we will execute the plan, and we hope that we can go steadily in the right direction. So that's very much the way I hope that we can think about this and present this, so neither of the extremes.
So, I mean, just to quote again the same American I quoted earlier on, he said this weekend, the one thing that this virus has taught you is not to be cocky.
Yeah.
So I think we just need to go very carefully. We need to monitor carefully and be prepared to react. And the other thing that I think is clear, which is important to bear in mind throughout, and we said this right the way at the beginning, this virus feeds off inequality and it drives inequality. And that needs to be borne in mind at all times during this.
It does. Martin Brown, The Express.
Thank you, Prime Minister. You've spent much of the last 2 years urging people to work from home to help the fight against COVID. As we move into this next phase, and with the economic recovery in mind, what is your message to those people who are still reluctant to return to their workplace? And what more should employers be doing to get their staff back?
Well, thanks very much, Martin. Look, I've always been a believer in the importance of people getting into work, particularly for younger people who need to build up social capital and understanding of their jobs, their professions, and their place of work. And I think it is invaluable. I think if people try to do everything remotely, they will miss stuff out. And so I would encourage people. They will lose out, and I would encourage people to get back to work with confidence. I think we have the right now, we have the grounds now to be confident, and we should be confident. I think that was it, wasn't it? Thank you. Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks, Martin. Dan Bloom, The Mirror.
Thank you, Prime Minister. You've just talked about asking people to exercise personal responsibility, even to break the habit of going into work when you're sick. But you're also scrapping day one statutory sick pay, the £500 payments. So just to be clear, are you saying that a low-wage worker who has COVID should stay at home even if they're not going to get paid? And can you look people who voted for you in the eyes and tell them that that is an acceptable situation? And to the scientists, Sir Chris and Sir Patrick, 2 quick questions. Will you both continue taking lateral flow tests beyond April if you're going to a crowded gathering like a pub or something like that? And are you satisfied that the plan announced today will not lead to a rise in long COVID and will keep immunosuppressed people safe enough? Thanks.
Thanks very much, Dan. Well, look, we want to make sure that, and I echo what Patrick just said just now about the inequalities of COVID, and that's why we've done everything that we can throughout the pandemic to support people on low incomes who've been having it tough with huge investments in hardship funds, increasing the living wage, all the contributions that we've made, and what we're doing now to tackle the cost of living. We totally get how difficult it has been. I think that it is still sensible for people to avoid spreading COVID and indeed any other dangerous respiratory disease. And I just go back to what I was saying earlier on. I think maybe we can learn something about the advantages of not spreading disease. Statutory sick pay is there, and also, of course, many people are entitled to other forms of pay. I know that won't be everybody, Dan, I understand that. But for those people who don't get enough support, we're trying to make sure that they get it in other ways, and they get helped in tough times through other support we're giving through local councils or by other routes.
In terms of the current situation, I mean, I'd like the prevalence to be lower, the rates of infections to be lower, and the SAGE advice, it's all in the public domain, shows that roughly somewhere between 20 and 40% reduction in transmission because of our current behaviours. So we're not back to pre-pandemic behaviours yet. And as those return, you would expect the pressure on transmission to increase. So there's something about cautious behaviour which remains. There's definitely the public health advice on isolation if you are positive with COVID. And I want to just re-emphasise the value of vaccination. And the long COVID point, there's now evidence that the vaccines don't just protect against infection and against severe disease, but they also reduce long COVID. So there's a very, very strong reason for everybody to be vaccinated, get up to the first dose, second dose and third dose. And of course, for the immunosuppressed, it's going to be, or the people who are particularly vulnerable, they may need another vaccine at some point to get that up, and they need access to antivirals, and they do need the access to testing in order to be in a position to be treated quickly. So I think there's a series of things that need to happen to keep everybody safe during what is inevitable, which is the world at some point needs to start returning to normal behaviours.
Will you carry on taking them even if you have to pay?
Sorry, go on.
Why don't I do that one? Because I completely agree, obviously, with Patrick's other comments. And I think there are 3 things that I will be trying to think about. First question is, how common is COVID at the moment? If it's very high, absolutely, that increases the probability. Second is the environment you're in. If you're in an environment where you're outside, a long way from other people, then the risks are so small it probably makes no difference. If you're in a crowded environment, absolutely. And the third, and probably the most important one, and it builds on what Patrick's just said, is if I'm mixing with vulnerable people. If I was going to see an elderly relative, if I was going to go to a let's say, haematology ward in a hospital, of course, those are the kind of situations I would want to minimise the risk to other people, because the whole point about the lateral flow is about minimising the risk to other people.
Thanks very much. Kevin Schofield, HuffPost.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Are you not simply adding to the cost of living crisis from April the 1st? People are looking at higher national insurance payments, higher energy bills, rising inflation, rising interest rates, and from April the 1st they're now going to have to pay probably about 20 quid for a box of lateral flow tests. Is that not simply adding to the cost of living crisis that people are already experiencing? And you talk about personal responsibility and people having to take on more personal responsibility now. Isn't that slightly hypocritical when you're under investigation from the police for allegedly breaking your own lockdown rules. And to the scientists, public messaging has been very important throughout the pandemic. Tonight you've said that the pandemic isn't over, and that future variants could be more serious than what we've seen previously. But at the same time, self-isolation rules are ending and we're getting rid of free tests. Is there not a danger that we're sending mixed messages to the public and they might simply just switch off?
Kevin, first of all, so I can't comment on the allegations that you refer to. As I've said before, we'll have to wait and see on that. But I think the point remains very, very important, that we're moving away from legal compulsion to personal responsibility. But on your point about cost of living, and just go back to where we were, this change in the testing regime won't come through for a few weeks to come, by which time we hope and expect that the incidents will have further declined. So I hope that the impact on people will be minimal. But what we're also trying to do is abate that, deal with the cost of living crisis in the most important possible way, and that's with helping people with universal credit, with lifting the living wage, but above all, getting them back into work with better paid jobs, and by the way, which would not have been possible if we hadn't had the openings up we had in the summer, and if we hadn't been able to keep going throughout Christmas and New Year. And it's that strength of the economy that is the single best protection for people, the single best thing that we can do as a government to help them tackle the cost of living, and that is of course being made possible by the vaccine rollout and the way people are pulled together.
I mean, public messaging is important, obviously. It's much more difficult practically, as someone who's trying to do it, when there's a transition than when you're giving the same message day in, day out. So, we have to accept that we're going through a transition, an appropriate transition, and that does mean we need to change the way we think about things, and that needs to be communicated as clearly as we can, and we do our best to do so. We don't always succeed perfectly. But I would make sort of a general point on the point about mandation, which is an issue absolutely for politicians and Parliament, and public health advice. They are separate things. There are very few areas of public health which we give advice on, which actually are subject to mandation. So it is a very atypical situation. What's happening is, in a sense, this is reverting away from an abnormal situation to a much more normal one. That doesn't mean the public health advice actually changes in terms of what, in broad principles, we think people should do, and I'm not going to repeat them, I said them right at the beginning. But I think it is important that people realise this is a steady change. This is not a sudden move. Of course, you announce changes at particular points in time, but actually what the Prime Minister has laid out is essentially a stepped series of things, and the ability to keep looking at things so that if there's a change in the environment, then we can at that point respond to that change.
And I would just refer you to some of the SAGE papers released last week that looked at this question about consistency of messaging, and the point that now it's health professionals, NHS, Chief Medical Officer, local directors of public health. That's where the clear, consistent messaging is going to come from, as Chris said, which is the advice that comes in rather than legal mandation. But that needs to be clear and consistent and aligned with overall government messaging, as you say.
Thank you, everybody, very much. I'm just going to go and talk to President Zelensky of Ukraine and offer him the support of the United Kingdom. Thank you.